In the woods, fields, and waterways of Virginia, there exists another world, the world of nature, the world of the birds and animals that live there. There is within this world a law of nature. There are those that hunt, and those that are hunted. In Virginia today, there are many species of wild animals that were here when Captain John Smith and the settlers first explored this territory. Such animals as the chipmunk. The chipmunk is found throughout the wooded areas of the state. Chipmunks are small, but very quick. Like other animals, the color of the chipmunk's coat helps him hide among the leaves and grass. Can you see the chipmunk? The chipmunk carries food in his cheek pouch. He stores food in a burrow so that he may sleep during most of the winter. A relative of the chipmunk is the squirrel. The gray is the most common in Virginia and is found in every part of the state. The squirrel eats about the same as the chipmunk, mostly nuts and berries. During the fall, they are very busy storing away food for the winter, which they put in the ground or in hollow parts of trees. They live in trees, often in nests made from leaves. Like the chipmunk and all animals in Virginia, squirrels do not actually hibernate during the winter, but they do take time out to rest a lot. A third member of this family is the woodchuck, or groundhog. This furry, overgrown ground squirrel is very common in Virginia. They're so popular that many folk tales are told about them. They have a special day reserved for them on the calendar, February 2nd, Groundhog's Day. Groundhogs like to dig. Their favorite foods are grasses, vegetables, and juicy plants, and they're often a nuisance to farmers. They live in burrows under trees or rock piles. They will dig several entrances to their homes, which other animals will occasionally borrow. During the late summer and fall, they eat a great deal and become quite fat. When winter approaches, they get very sluggish and will sleep during most of the winter. Some animals live their lives in or around water. For example, the beaver, which is the largest rodent found in America, spends most of his time in the water. Of all the wild animals, it is said that beavers are the hardest workers. Perhaps you've heard the saying, busy as a beaver. When the beavers move into an area, they first build a dam on a stream. When the water backs up and a pond is formed, they build a house or lodge. The lodge is partly under the water as well as partly above. The beaver dives under the surface of the pond and enters his home from under the water. The beaver's webbed hind feet make him a good swimmer, and he can stay underwater for some time. The beaver had a great deal to do with the settling of this country. The early pioneers learned that the fur of the beaver was in high demand, and people who trapped these animals could make much money when they sold the pelts. This encouraged more people to come to this country. In fact, so many people trapped beavers for a living that by 1910, the beaver population in Virginia was almost wiped out. A few years later, the state passed laws to protect the beaver, and they are now quite common. The beaver eats bark from trees as well as plants growing in or near the water. He gnaws down trees with his big front teeth. The beaver uses limbs and sticks, along with mud, to make sturdy dams and lodges. The beaver tail is broad and flat, and he uses it as a warning device by slapping his tail against the water. The beaver always keeps busy, living up to his reputation. The muskrat is like the beaver in that he stays near the water. However, the muskrat is much more common in the state. These animals especially like marshy areas and will often build their houses on top of the water, using reeds and sticks, much like the beaver. They will occasionally live in burrows dug in the side of riverbanks. Muskrats look very much like very large rats. Like the beaver, they're also fur-bearing animals, although their coats are not as beautiful as the beaver's. Here is an animal whose fur is one of the most prized of all, the mink. The minks are surprisingly common in Virginia, although like the beavers, they seldom leave their shelter in the daytime. They live in wooded areas near streams and make their homes in burrows, which they line with leaves and grass for a nest. The mink is a member of the weasel family, and therefore it eats other animals, and sometimes he kills just for the joy of killing. A mink is aggressive, but he's also quite small. The adults weigh only 2 to 3 pounds. A close relative of the mink, and another animal which has a beautiful coat, is the otter. Otters are considerably bigger than their relatives, the minks. Mature otters weigh an average of 20 pounds. Otters actually spend most of their time in the water, but will occasionally cross land between streams. They're usually found along swamp rivers and mountain streams. They're excellent swimmers and are good at catching fish. They live in a burrow which they dig in the bank of a stream. Otters are the most playful of all wild animals, but are also shy and are rarely seen by man. Another character that shows a fondness for water, but in a different way, is the raccoon. If a raccoon is near water, he will often wash his food before eating it. His diet varies greatly, all the way from clams to corn and from eggs to small birds. Raccoons are expert climbers and usually live in hollow trees. They're quite common throughout Virginia and the eastern two-thirds of the United States. The largest of Virginia's wild animals is the elk. Elk once roamed throughout Virginia, but were completely wiped out by 1855. Several years ago, however, elk were brought back into the state. Today, there are 2 herds in Virginia totaling about 200 animals. One of the outstanding features of elk is the light-colored patch on the rump. Bull, or male elk, can get to weigh as much as 1,000 pounds and have antlers as much as 5 feet long. They eat grass and the leaves on bushes and trees. In the fall of the year, bull elk will round up their own group of cows. At this time, one bull may become very jealous of another, and he will insult him by making a thin, almost bugle-like sound. Sometimes bulls even fight each other. But at last they go off, each with his own herd until next summer. The best known and favorite big game animal in America and in Virginia is the Virginia white-tailed deer. The deer is a close relative of the elk and is found throughout the state. An English mathematician working for Sir Walter Raleigh was the first to describe the deer in a visit to Virginia in 1585. 200 years later, this animal was cataloged scientifically as the Virginia deer. Deer meat, called venison, was the principal meat source for the Indians and the early settlers. The coat of the animal, called buckskin, was used for clothes. Deer eat mostly leaves from brush and woody plants, and also grass. The male deer, or buck, will weigh between 150 to as much as 300 pounds. Each spring, the bucks shed their antlers and grow new ones by the fall. The doe, or female deer, will weigh from 100 to 150 pounds. The does have the same color and markings as the bucks, except they do not have antlers. The white-tailed deer get their name from the underside of the tail, which is white. When the deer are frightened and run, they raise their tails, perhaps as a signal that danger is near. When deer run, they actually leap, and they can jump very high. In the spring of the year, the doe gives birth to the baby deer, called fawn. The young fawn has white spots on his coat, which will help him hide, because the color of his coat blends in with the surrounding underbrush. Here is an animal that is familiar to everyone, the cottontail rabbit. The rabbit is one of the most common and abundant wild animals in the nation. Cottontails live in nests in the underbrush or in holes dug in the ground. Rabbits eat grasses, berries, tender roots, and bark, and they can be damaging to farm crops. Rabbits are very fast for short distances, but also rely on cunning to outwit their enemies. Often they will sit perfectly still and allow danger to pass by them. One of the biggest enemies of the cottontail is the fox. This is the red fox. Besides rabbits, they eat birds, snakes, and other small animals. The red fox is common in the farmed areas of the state and the open woods. A cousin of the red fox is the gray fox. These foxes are not seen as often because they prefer wild, heavy forest areas. They come out of their den or burrow usually at night. The coat of the foxes are fairly valuable, and at one time there was much trapping of foxes. It wasn't always easy to trap a fox, however, because they were very cunning. You've probably heard the phrase, sly as a fox. The mother foxes have their young in the spring, about May. There are usually 4 or 5 babies, called kits, to the litter. The young stay with the parents throughout the summer and then are on their own. Another North American big game animal, which is a favorite among sportsmen, is the black bear. In Virginia, the black bear is found in the mountain areas and also in the Dismal Swamp. Black bears are the smallest of bears found in North America, but the adults still grow to be better than 5 feet long and weigh from 150 to as much as 500 pounds. Their eyesight is poor, but they can rely on their excellent sense of smell and hearing. Bears can climb trees, especially if they're tempted by one of their favorite foods, such as honey. Bears eat a great variety of foods, including roots, berries, fish, mice, honey, grass, and sometimes young farm animals. Their varied appetite prompted the expression, hungry as a bear. Many bears sleep during much of the winter in a simple cave or den. However, they can be awakened easily by any disturbance. They are powerful animals, but they're also shy and will not attack man unless cornered or wounded. There are many stories told about bears, but no animal is more popular in Southern folk stories and song than is the opossum, or possum, as it is commonly called. Captain John Smith wrote one of the earliest descriptions of the opossum while he was exploring Virginia around 1607. He stated that, "An opossum hath a head like a swine, and a tail like a rat, and is the bigness of a cat." This uncomplimentary description is nevertheless accurate, for the possum is a rather ugly animal. Opossums are at home either on the ground or in trees. They sometimes will hang upside down from a tree limb, wrapping their tail around the limb as an anchor. When an opossum meets an enemy, he will play possum or pretend to be dead. Like the bear, the opossum will eat almost anything, from young birds and eggs to corn and shoots of plants. The opossum is the only marsupial animal in North America. That is, it is the only animal that has a pouch in which it carries and nurses its young. The mother opossum will give birth to about 20 young. From this litter, 8 to 13 babies will survive. After the babies are about 2 months old, they will leave the mother's pouch and will often ride on her back. An enemy of the opossum is the bobcat, sometimes called the lynx or wildcat. The bobcat is found in the mountains and in the dismal swamp. They make their den in hollow trees or small caves. The wildcat usually hunts at night and therefore is rarely seen. He will occasionally kill deer, but the usual food includes rabbits, mice, and other small animals. The important characteristics of the bobcat are its short or bob tail and the small tufted ears. The animal weighs up to as much as 40 pounds and will grow to be 3 feet long. The wildcat is normally shy, but if he's aroused or cornered, he's a ferocious and dangerous fighter. The bobcat is also an excellent climber. He will climb high in a tree, especially if pursued, as he finds this an easy means of defense. But here is a fellow that has the best defensive weapon of all, and neither man nor animal fails to take heed when a skunk is angered. The skunk seems to know that the odor which he can give off is powerful, and he is neither hurried nor afraid. This is the striped or eastern skunk. Also found in Virginia is the smaller or spotted skunk. These animals prefer cleared farmland. They will usually live in burrows dug by other animals or around rock piles. They live on insects and mice, which they get by digging or rooting in the dirt. Vegetable matter and eggs are also a part of their diet. And judging from this fellow's size, he likes to eat. So this is Virginia's other world, the world of wild animals, much as it was 3.5 centuries ago, when John Smith and the first settlers arrived in America.